Pagination is the process of dividing a large number of records or items into smaller chunks or pages. Pagination is useful as it allows user to view a large amount of data in more manageable way. So there are different ways by which we can implement the pagination, one of them being cursor pagination. Cursor pagination is an approach in which we use a cursor, which is something like a pointer, which can track the position of the next record set, and we can easily navigate into the previous or the next page based upon the provided cursor. So in this video tutorial, we are learning how to create a REST API using Golang with the framework GoFiber. We'll be using GORM as the ORM and MySQL. So our target will be to implement a cursor paginator in that particular REST endpoint. So without any delay, let's get started. So I have a folder called Book.go where the code of the application will reside, and please note that within my MySQL database, I have created a new database called Bookie_go. So let's get started by initializing a new module. So we can simply do this by this command, go mode init, the URL of my GitHub and the repository. Simply by doing this, it will create a new file called go.mod. So you can see this is the module file. So now, next thing that we need to do is we need to install GoFiber as our dependency, and we'll also get few of the other dependencies. So GoFiber is very popular framework within the Go community, and it is very similar to Node.js. So the developers who have good experience with Node.js, they can basically love it. They will basically love it. So without any delay, let's continue. So firstly, we need to get the Fiber itself. Go get github.com, and we will be getting it from GoFiber/Fiber and p2. So this will basically install the GoFiber as our dependency. Along with that, we need to get GORM, and then we also need the MySQL driver. So it can be got from gorm.io driver/MySQL. So next we need, finally we'll be installing UUID. So go get github.com/google/UUID. So these are the basic dependencies that we wanted. So you can see we have a new file called go.sum, which is similar to composer.log or package-log.json if we compare with Node.js, JavaScript or PHP. So now we within Go we have a main file, which is the main entry point, which is main.go, and let's start by creating the main file, which will be main.go. We need few of the directories as well, so let's create them as well. So first will be the models, where we'll have our model residing over there, and then next we need is database, and finally we'll have some sort of helpers. So let's create a folder for the helpers as well. So now let's get started with the models part. So as you know, we are creating a application REST API called Bookie. So it will basically have some information or the REST API related to the books. So let's create a model called book for that. So this will be book.go, and then the package will be models, and then we need to define the structure of it. So the type of book, it is a struct. So what will be the fields that we want to have on this model? It will be ID, we'll have the title, we'll have description, and we'll have the name of the author, we'll have the price, and we'll also have the created at and the dated at field. So within Golang, so it is strictly type language, so we need to define the type of these properties as well. So ID is going to be string because we'll be using UUID, and we can provide some other informations like GORM. The property related to GORM is that it will be our primary key, and then let's add few of the data for the other fields quickly. So title, it's going to be string as well, and then it will be for the title, it's when represented as JSON, it will be title, and it will be type of varchar, and it is not null. So let's do the same thing for the description as well. So it will be description, and then the type will not be the varchar, instead it will be text. We should support a large amount of data because it is not a simple varchar. And for the author, let's simply keep this to author, and for the price, simply keep this as uint, and the type of the author is string, and then the price, the type will be, because we already have defined this as uint, in JSON it's price, and in GORM we'll simply define this as not null. Let's keep this as simple it is at the moment. And for the created at and the updated at, uint, and then it will be time, same will go for time. So the next thing is that since we are using UID, so before we insert the data into our model, we want to make sure that the ID is stored as a UID, and we are using the package from Google which we installed. So now we'll create a method which is something like a hook before create hook. So what does this do is that before creating an entity, so it will simply set the value of ID to new string. So we are done with this. So now let's create we have a folder called database. So now within this database we need to have some mechanism so that we can connect to the database. So let's simply create this database.go, and then it is the package database, and then we'll have a variable called db which is of the type GORM db, and it seems GORM is not imported, so let's import it as well. So import, we can import it from gorm.io/gorm. Okay, and then now we need to create a new method for initializing the db. So inside this, let's first define a variable for error, and then we need to have some sort of full DSN. So it will be root@tcp 127.0.0.1 and 3306, and then name of the table is bookie_go, and then we need few other things like this which I am copying, and I will simply append it over here. Just a second, and then you can see this is our DSN. So basically this is the username, this is the password, and then this is the URL of the host. Basically we are working in the local environment, so it's local host, and this is the port. So if you had some other port, then you could have mentioned this, and this is the name of the database. So now we'll have to get connected to the database. So we can do this by gorm.open, and then we need to do mysql.open providing the DSN, and then we need to pass some sort of config which will be keeping as it is at the moment. So if there is any error, what will we do is we will simply fatal will log the error, will basically shut down the application because there is some problem with database connection. It means we do not have connection to the database, which is not required for us, so we can kill the application. So if everything is okay, what can we do is we can simply say that database connection is successful, and then we can also set few other things like db.logger is equal to logger.default.log mode, and then we'll pass logger.info. So I will show what this does in a minute. And then we also want to auto migrate our model. So it will basically create the table based upon the provided information. So db.auto migrate. In this case, what can I pass is we already have the models created, which is models.book. I can simply pass this, and then it is giving some sort of error, and then we simply pass this, and then finally we set this variable db to the db which we got by connecting to the GORM. So now we will be making use of these variables moving forward. So yeah, I think that's fine for now. So we have created a model, we have created a database. So now let's go to our main file, which is main.go, and then basically initialize our routes over there. So the package will be main, as this will be the main entry point. We need to define a main function over here. So the first thing that we need to do is we create an instance of the app, which will be fiber.new. We'll be creating the new instance of the fiber. So we'll leave rest of the things as they are, and in the upcoming videos we will implement those things. So first thing, after creating a new app, we will connect to our database, or simply initialize the database, and then we can add few of the routes over here. So initially we do not have any data. So what do I want to do is I want to create an endpoint which will seed 20 data, which will be used for us in preparing the paginated data, because we do not want to manually insert all of the data. So let's say the syntax is very similar to Express.js. So app.get, so this will be a get request, and let's say the URL is books/seed, and then it will get the context of the fiber, and then it will return an error. And then let's say, so now inside this, what do we want to do is var book models.book. So we created the instance of model.book, and then so now what we want to see is that we want to seed some 20 data. So for that we'll be using a for loop, and then we'll be setting few of the random data. So I simply copied this to save the time. So as you can see, we are starting from 20, and then we are coming to 1, and then we are setting the title of the book, and it says that book.created at is undefined. So let me go to the book created at. It should be created at. So now, yeah, everything is okay. But one thing that I would like to do is before I seed this data or insert this data to the table, I want to delete every data that is within that table, because I do not want to have more than 20 data within my table. So let's see if error. So what we'll do is database.db will execute this command. So the command will be delete from books where 1, and if there is some error, and if the error is not is equal to nil, so in that scenario what will we do is we'll send some so we'll set the status to 500, and then we'll send some JSON data saying that unable to delete the data, and then we can see rest of the data will be carried out. So firstly, what we did, we are trying to create our seed data. So let's go to our terminal, and then to run the application we can do go run main.go. So this will search for the main search for the main method over there. So there is something that we missed. So finally we booted the application, but we have not listened to any port. So for that, what can we do is we can simply listen for the particular endpoint like we do in the express.js. So let's say we'll be listening, we want to run our application on the port 3000. So simply let's listen on the 3000. So if you are missing something, you can see those are the things that we have imported. So now let's run the application. So okay, the application is already in use. Maybe I'm using this for some other purpose. In that case, I will run this on port 3001. So let's see. So now we can see we got all sort of logs. So this beautiful log that we got, we specified the thing within this database.go. So we had specified this so that we are getting a very nice database logger like this. So now we can see the application is booted on port 3001. So there is no data on the 3000/1, but we have a route called book, and then it is a main route. It is known as books/seed. So books/seed, what will this do is it will seed the data. So to verify, let's open this beautiful extension for the VS Code. So now we'll perform the new query. So what will we do is select everything from books. I don't know if this would work. In that case, I will have to specify the name of database as well. So doing this, and if I run the MySQL query, yeah, I can see that all of the data are got. So now, as you can see, we basically seeded the data. So there are some packages which are similar to Laravel's migrator or some sort of other migrators like type ORM's migrating tool, something like that, which can be used to seed or migrate the data instead of doing all the things manually, because we created the table using this particular command. We did the auto migration. That might not be the ideal case in case of the production. We'll have to ignore those things, but for now we are keeping the things very, very simple, and in upcoming videos we'll take a look into that as well. So now the next thing that we want to do is we will create a controller for the books controller, and that will have some method. I will not save anything at the moment. So we'll create a controller for the books, and from the books controller we will have the main logic which does the querying for the pagination. So let's go over here, and then let's create a folder called controllers. So okay, this is the problem with VS Code. This is something that I do not like. Okay, I'll do this from my terminal. So what will I do is mkdir, I'll make a directory called controllers, and then I will go to the controllers, and I will create a file called bookscontroller.go, and then let's open the controllers, and this will be the package called controllers, and then we'll have a method called get paginated books, as we are aiming to get the paginated books. And now it will take the fiber.context, and then it should return the error. So the first and the foremost thing that we need to do is define a variable called books, which will be the array of the models.book. So now there are few things that we want to take a look. So like from our input we want to pass the per underscore page, which is something like the size of the pagination. And the next thing is we also want to pass the sort underscore order, uh, because we can get the data in ascending order or in the descending order. And because we are using the pagination cursor paginator, we need to pass some sort of cursor as in the query parameters. So let's say the URL is abc.com, and then we need to pass something like cursor, and this will be some encoded data. So we need to pass a cursor like this. So we'll be getting three things. First thing we'll be getting is the per page, next thing we'll be getting the sort order, and finally we'll be getting the cursor. So let's manage the things. So we can declare a variable called the per page, which we'll be getting from the query parameter. So it will be per underscore page, and the default value will be 10. So the default value that we want to have is 10. And the next thing is sort order, and then this will also be coming from the query itself, and it will be sort underscore order. And then let's say we want by default we want to have the order to be the descending if the user does not provide anything. And then there will be something called cursor, and then this will be c dot query, and then it will be cursor. So if the user does not provide anything, it should be empty. So the few things that we need to notice over here is that anything that we get from the query, it is string. And then we need, if the data that we want to manipulate or work on is different than string, we will have to convert them. So we want per page as an integer item, not as an string. So in that case we'll have to convert them. So for that, so I will name this as a limit. And now what will I do is I will convert this using strcunv package, and then I'll parse int, and then I will pass the per page, and then I will use this 10 and 64. And next thing, so if the user passed something like if the limit was less than 1, or if the limit was greater than 100, so you can keep the any value, but less than 1 is not a good option. So in that case, let's set the limit to 10. Let's keep the things very simple, because we are focusing on the pagination query part, not on these things. So if there is no error, so over here if there is no error, in that if there is some error, if the error is not nil, what we will do is return c dot status. Let's set the status code to 500, and in JSON what can we do is invalid per underscore page option. That can be done. So now we need to proceed towards the calculation of the pagination. So over here it needs to be something like this. Instead I had missed the curly braces. So now let's move on to the implementation part. So till this point we got the input data, and we fixed something if there is some validation error or something. So we can consider this as the validation error. So next thing what we need to do is we need to perform the query in the database, so that we can get the paginated data. And then based upon the query we need to get the data, and then finally we will have to manipulate the data, and then calculate the cursors. So that would be our strategy. So the first thing, we want to do the query part, and I want to make the query reusable. So for that I need to create a new file within the database part, so that it can be called from the other models as well. So within the database, let's quickly create a new helper or another file called pagination.go. It needs to be renamed pagination.go, so it belongs to the package database. So over here we'll have a function called get paginatedQuery, and then it will take few of the arguments. So the first thing will be query, and it will be coming from GORM.db, and then we'll have to know if this points next, it will be of type bool. And then we also need to pass the cursor, which is of the type string, and then we also need the sort order, which is of the type string, and it will basically return query in itself, GORM.db, and then also it will return information whether or not we are pointing next or not, because this will be used from the controller. And finally, if there are some errors, we will be returning it. So let's move on to the implementation part. So if let's say the cursor was passed, and if it is not empty, only in that case we'll have to perform some of the query like this. So first thing, as I mentioned, that within the URL parameters, something like abc.com/cursor is equal to something, we'll be passing a encoded data. So first thing that we need to do is decode the data first, because the data that is sent back from our API to the user is encoded, and the user, when he wants to get the next page, he sends the encoded data. So first thing that we want to do is we want to decode the data. So first thing, we'll have to implement decoding mechanism, and for doing that we need to create a helper. So that helper will be used to encode and decode the cursor. So for that purpose I want to make it a general helper. So within the helpers, let's create pagination.go. I do not want to keep this within this database slash pagination.go because it is not completely related to database. So we are trying to separate the responsibility of the files. So it will be a package helpers. So we'll have something like, we'll have one cursor, and then it will basically be a map of string, and the next value, it can be anything. We'll make this a simple thing. So it will be something like this. Cursor will be a map which has a key as a string, and the value can be anything. So now let's create few methods over here. First thing that we need to do is encode the cursor, and then another mechanism for decoding the cursor. So func encode cursor, and then this will basically take cursor as argument, and then it should return a string. So encoding means we are trying to make this as a string. So if length of the cursor is 0, in that case we simply return empty string. And then if the length is not 0, we'll have to serialize the data and then encode it. So what we can do is serialized cursor, and it also returns an error. So that will be coming from json.marshal, and then we'll simply do the cursor. So we are basically serializing the input, and if there is no error, in that, if there is some error, I always get confused when speaking about this. So if there is some error, or if the error is not nil, then we simply return an empty string, and then we finally encode the cursor using the following command. So base 64, we'll encode it to base 64, and doing the standard encoding, and we encode to string, and then we can simply pass the serialized cursor. So whatever the data was passed, it will be serialized first, and then it will be encoded, and then finally we can return the encoded cursor. And finally, let's add the function to decode the cursor quickly. Decode cursor. So this will take cursor as a string, so it will be of the type string. Anything that the user has passed as the input, it will be a string, and while decoding we return the instance of the cursor, and if there is some error, we return it back as well. So decoded cursor or error is, first we need to decode it using the same package base 64 dot standard encoding dot decode string, and we pass the cursor. And if there is some error, if error is not nil, if there is some error, we will simply have to return empty instance of the cursor, and we pass the error so that it can be cached from the place where it is calling it. And then we define a variable called cur, which is the type of cursor, which is the type of this, basically a map, and then we need to unmarshal it. So let's do it. So if error is equal to base 64, if is equal to json.onMarshal, and then we pass the decoded cursor and also the address of the cursor. So, and if the error is not nil, we can simply assume that there is an error, and we return the error, and means we are fine. So we simply return the cursor, and we do not have the error, so we return as it is. So this is the function that will be used for decoding the cursor. So the next thing, I want to quickly create two other helper methods that will be used by our application. So we already have created a type cursor, which is basically a map of string. So now let's create a function for creating a cursor. So to create a cursor, what we are going to use is that, so as you know, there are different fields within our table. So we'll be making use of the id, and we'll be making use of the created at, because it will be used in our query. So I'll be explaining this in a minute. So for now, so for creating a cursor, we simply get id, which is the type of string, and we need to get the value for created at time, and then we need to know whether or not we are pointing to next. So that is the basic agreement or the deal. So over here, when the data is passed, we simply return the instance of the cursor, and then we map the values like this. So we set the values like id is id, created underscore at is the created at, and finally for points, whether or not it is pointing next, it will be using this variable. So we are done, and then we will create another method which is for generating the pager. So we'll do this later on. So for now we are okay with this. So now let's go back to our helper. So if the cursor is not empty, we need to now decode the cursor. So decoded cursor, and then it also returns an error. So what will we do is we will simply call helpers dot decode cursor, and we can simply pass our cursor. And then if there is some error, if error is not nil, so what can we basically do is, as you know, we are returning three things from here. The first one being the instance of the db or the query, second one being points next, and error. So if there is some error, what will we return? We will return nil. Whatever the value was passed for points next, we simply return that back, and then error, because this will not give any this is an situation of an error, so it will be handled accordingly. So now we need to check if it is pointing next. So this can be done by using the decoded cursor, and then it has the value of points underscore next, and we'll check if the value is true. So now we need to perform some sort of query over here. So how this method will be called is from the bookscontroller.go. Over here we firstly got the request parameters. We applied basic validation, and the next thing we need to call the helper function within pagination.go. So I will give you a hint how we will be working on this. So first thing that we need to check is if we are on the first page, because when we are on the first page, we should not be worrying about calculating the previous page, or we only should worry about if there will be some extra items or the next page. So for that case, we need to see if the cursor was passed. If the cursor was empty, it means we are on the first page. And for pointing points next, so what can we do is we set this as false. So why I'm making use of the points next is that there will be two scenarios when we return the paginated data. So let's suppose this is the whole set of data, and then we want to have a cursor value. So the cursor will be there will be a cursor, so we need to have the previous cursor and the next cursor. We will return two data as a response. So the encoded data, it needs to keep an information of whether or not we are trying to get the next page or we are trying to get the previous page. So instead of passing the two query parameters, what can we do is we can have a single query parameter, abc.com/cursor, and then this encoded data will have the information about whether we are trying to get the next page or the previous page. So from here, after this, we need to get the instance of the query. So this is database.db. As you look into this method, the first argument that we accept is the instance of GORM.db. So now we get the basic query, and then from here we are trying to get the query. We also are trying to get whether or not we are pointing to next, and if there is some error, we are checking these things. So what we need to do is database.getPaginatedQuery. We pass the query, we pass the points next, and we also pass the cursor, and finally we need to check the sort order. And if there is some error, we simply return c.status to 500, and then simply send a JSON saying unable to get the paginated query. So I think you pretty much got the idea what we will be dealing with. So at this point, it says that it is not it is not giving the perfect return. So it is not returning the things in perfect. So we need to make this usable. So now let's go inside this. So we decoded the data. We also checked whether or not we are pointing next. So based upon this, we need to perform some database query which will be used. So the next thing that we need to do is we will create a new method over here which will be used to calculate the pagination operator that will be applied. So I will be showing this in a second, so in a while. So let's implement this. So firstly, let's make this method get paginated and then operator. So what this will accept is it will accept if it is pointing next, it will be type of both, and then we also need the sort order and the string, and it will return both string because we want to return the order, the paginated operator, and the sort order. So there will be the different case. So if we are pointing next and if sort order is ascending, so there will be the four different cases. So in that case, we want to have this and empty. So I will explain this to you with practical example in a while with the verification. So there will be another situation as well. So I will simply copy this once again, and then so if we are pointing next and if the sort order is DSC, we simply change the operator to this, and we do not have any sort order returned. So if we are not pointing next, that means we are pointing to previous, and if the sort order is ascending, in that case we return this and we return descending. And if finally in the last case, if we are pointing to next and the sort order is descending, in that case we need to return this, and if there was some sort of error, we simply return empty. So we created this method. So now over here what we need to do is we need to get the operator, and then we also need the sort order. We will be calling this method get paginated operator. So we need to pass the points next and sort order. So we could have done the calculation over here, but we want to simplify our code, so we basically extracted this into its own method. So so after this we need to perform some where query. So till this point our query is very basic. So we are simply passing database.db. It is something like select something, something. So from here onwards we will apply some where logic to our query. So let's prepare the where string. So let's name this as where string, and then what will we do is let's prepare the string first, and we're using as printf. So over here we will be doing created underscore add percentage s, or I will show this to you in a while. So created underscore add is equal to what, and id percentage s what, and then we simply close the bracket, and we need to pass the operator and operator, and then finally we need to append our query by query dot where. We need to pass the where string, and then we need to pass a few things like decoded cursor. We need to pass the created underscore add, and then let's simply copy this once more, and then finally created add id. So what are we trying to do is that the query will be something like this. Let's assume it was a books table. Select everything from books where created add, and then where created add. So this percentage s means we are passing the operator, so the operator that we basically generated from here. So in, let's say it was points next and the sorted order was ascending. So in that case what would the value be is select everything from books where created add, it will be greater than percentage s. So greater than uh, so created add greater than, or created add is equal to, so we need to replace this value which will be got from here. We are created add, we are using the we are trying to prevent SQL injection. So we are making the use of the prepared statements, and then created add is equal to, it will be the value something like this, and id once again percentage s. So id once again percentage s means the same operator, once again it will be greater than, and the percentage s means it will be the value. So this will be the query that it will be generating. So finally, so you know that we returned empty uh, sort order in two of the cases. So if order is not empty, in that case we set the sort order to order, and then finally after this what can we do is we can simply return the final query. So it will be query, and then we also need to perform the order, and it will be created underscore add space plus sort order, and then finally we return the query. We also return whether or not we are not pointing next, and then we do not have any errors at this point, so we return nil. So from here, so what did we get? We get the query, we get whether or not we are pointing to next, and we also got if there is some error. So if there was some error, we could basically throw an 500 error. So now we have got this data. So what can we do is that we need to now perform the query and set the values to this model. So we need to perform the query to get the data. So how can we do this in GORM is, so we can simply let's set a variable to err, which is error. So we simply call the query, and then we need to perform the limit. So it will be select everything from books where something something something, and we need to pass the limit. So this is the limit. The limit will be int limit, and then we need to check we do +1. So we are passing +1 over here, and then we need to find the books, and then if there is some error we simply try to check this. So if error is not nil, it means we could not perform the query, so there was problem in performing the query. So if there is some error, so the status will be 500, and we will send a JSON. It is not a JSON, it's basically a string, but let's assume this is a JSON. So unable to get the books data. So this is the thing, and if so it means we basically perform the query, and whatever the values that we got, it will be stored within the books variable. So now what can we do is we need to check if there is pagination or not. So to check, what can we do is if the length of the books is greater than the limit, it means we have the pagination. So to explain this to you, let's say there were 20 items in our database. So we want to get data like abc.com/cursor is something, and per underscore page is equal to 2. Let's say we had a request like this. So to know whether or not there is a pagination, we need to see we need to query in the database by getting 2 plus 1, we need to get the 3 items. So if we get 3, and that means there is a pagination. If not, it means there is no next items. So this is the very basic thing. So we basically checked whether or not we have got the pagination. So if we have pagination, what can we do is we need to update the books. So we'll be getting the books by simply getting the books only up to the limit. So we'll omit the last data that was returned, because we were performing that check only to see whether or not we have next items. So now we need to do another thing. So if we are not on the first page, and if we are not pointing next, what we need to do is we need to reverse the item, or reverse the book. So we need to create a method called reverse within the helpers. So we'll be doing it in a second. So within the helpers, so as you know, there is only a method called pagination.go, but let's create a new file called command.go, because this can be used by other it can be used throughout the application for the different scenarios. So we can simply create a method over here. So we will create a method called reverse. So it will be function called reverse, and we are making use of the generics over here. So the provided value can be anything, and then let's say this as is array that is provided to us, and then we'll be returning the array of the type. So for this, I will simply save the time by copying the code. Yeah, so basically we are writing a code which reverses array or slice. So it says okay, we quickly have to import it, and then with this we are now ready with our data. So if we are not on the first page, and if we are pointing to the previous page, what we need to do is we need to reverse the items. So we'll be exploring what the reason is in a second when we are doing when we are checking the logs. So now we need to get the page info, because till this point we got the data. We are returning the paginated data, but we do not have any information about the pagination information. It means we need to calculate page info, whether or not there is a cursor in the next page or in the previous page. So we need to calculate the page info. So for that, within the same database helper pagination.go, we need to create a method called calculate pagination, and then this will see if this is the first page, if this has pagination, and then we need to pass the limit that we wanted and the item, and let's finally check if we are pointing to next. So within this pagination.go, we will create another method which will be an exported method. So please note a difference, that when we have the method like this, and if the first string or the first character of the method is on the small letter, it means it is not exported, but in the scenario like this, it means we are exporting this method. So now we need to create another method for export. We will export this, so it will be calculate pagination. So we need to make the use of the generics as well. So we will have something like this, depaginated item. I will fix this in a while. We'll get something like, if this is the first page, it is a boot, and we need to check if this has pagination, because we need to calculate this, and we need to get the limit, which will be of type int, and we also need to get the items, which is a generic, because currently we are using this only for book, but we want this to be reusable. So the article that I wrote on the Medium or on dev.to, it was not generic like this, but the current implementation we are trying to make it generic. So and then we finally need to know whether or not we are pointing to next, and then it will return the instance of helpers.pagination info, which we will be dealing with in a while. So basically, so you can see we have a new method which requires few of the parameters, and then the type that we are trying to make it generic, it needs to be the instance of the paginated item. So we'll now make the use of interface. So let's go to the top over here. What can we do is we'll create a new interface which will be known as paginated item, and then it will be of the type interface. So now we need to do something like get id, and then it will return a string, and then get created at, it will be of the type time.time. So the reason what we are doing over here is that, so we want to make this to be reusable. So we want this pagination calculation mechanism to be used by the other models as well. So we cannot hard code the type of the books. So for doing this, we need to make it we are trying to make this reusable. So I'm unable to explain this in words. So now let's quickly go to our book.go. So we need to make sure that our book model, it implements the interface. So for that reason, it need to have the methods like get id, which will take the book, which will be of type book, and then it will return an string. So we simply need to return book dot id, and then we also need get created at, and then it needs to be created at, and it will be time dot time. So now with this, what have we done is our model, the entity is now implementing the interface, and within the reusable helper, so we assume that the type, so we need to pass the items, so it needs to be of the type which is implementing that particular interface. So with this, we can get a mechanism by which our code can be reusable. It can be used by the other methods as well. So now let's quickly move on to the implementation part. So the one thing that we are still missing is we have not defined something that we were doing in the past. So over here, as you see, we have the instance for the cursor, uh, we have the type for the cursor. So there was one method which was remaining to implement, so which I had promised to do it now. So over here we'll create a new struct, so which is named as pagination info, and then it will be of type struct. So it will have two things, next cursor, and it is of the type string, and in the JSON representation will represent this as next underscore cursor. So this is the beauty of the Golang. So previous cursor, and in the JSON representation it will be pref underscore cursor. So we also need to have one method over here. So the final method will be generate pager. So func generate pager, so which we are going to make the use of in the current implementation. So generate pager, so it will return the pagination info. So when the cursor is passed, what will we do is we return the pagination info, and we know it has something like next cursor. So next cursor, we can simply encode the cursor, and then we need to, sorry, I did a mistake. So generate pager, it needs to accept two things. It needs to take next as the cursor and the previous as the cursor. So when the next is passed, we basically encode it, and for the previous cursor we simply encode it, and then we pass the pref. So you can see we are seeing some sort of error. So the reason is that we had exported this method as we had made this method so that it was exported to other so yeah, we by changing this to small case, it means we are using this within this file only. So let's implement this method. Firstly, we'll create a variable called pagination, which will be the instance of helpers.pagination info, and then we also need next cursor, which is the instance of helper.cursor. Same goes for previous cursor, it will be helpers.cursor. So we are setting these values to default. So now we need to perform some sort of calculations. There will be the different cases. So like the first case is if we are on the first page. So if we are on the first page, the thing is that it means there is no cursor provided. The only thing that we need to be worried of is to calculate the next whether or not there is a next page. So we already have got the data whether or not there is pagination. So in that case, what can we do is if there is if it has pagination, we can simply update the next core variable to create a cursor. So here we need to pass the last item, and then we need to get the ID. So as you can see, since we had implemented this interface, we have now access to the get ID method, so we can easily get the ID and the created add field. So let's assume that throughout our whole application, throughout our whole API, we'll use the same mechanism where we can pass the ID and the created add, which will be used by the query to calculate the pagination. So in that case, what can we do is items, and then limit -1 dot get created add, and then the last parameter that the create cursor accepts is whether or not we are trying to get the next page or points next. So it is true. So yeah, so we could have simplified the code, but for now we are keeping this very simple. So now we need to finally create update the pagination. So the pagination will be helpers dot generate pager, or we could have named this anything. So we need to pass next cursor and the previous cursor. So we already have that. So next code is this, and the previous cursor we could pass either nil or prev cursor is also fine. So this is the first case scenario. So when we are on the first page, we perform these things. On the first page, there is no previous page. So now for the else, if we are on the next page where the cursor is provided. So even in this case, there will be two cases. The first case being whether we are pointing to next or whether we are pointing to previous. So let's quickly do, if we are pointing to the next, so while pointing next, we need to understand one thing is that there is always previous, but there might be next page, there might not be next page. So now what can we do is, if it has pagination, then so we need to be very very sure there will be next only if there is pagination. So we simply update the next car value, and then this will be helpers dot create cursor, and then it will have items limit minus 1. Basically it will be almost the same content like this. So let me just copy this thing. So helpers dot create cursor limit minus 1 dot get id and get created at and true. So this is the first scenario. So as we said, there will always be the previous page when we are when we are not on the first page. So for that thing, what can be done is helpers dot create cursor, and over here we need to pass the first item, and then items 0 dot get created at, and then since we are trying to get the cursor for the previous page, it should be false. So we can once more generate the pagination like this: helpers the generate pager and next cursor and the previous cursor. Someone might argue that instead of doing this here, we could have done this at the end of all the if and else cases. That is also true, but I'm keeping the things very simple. So we completed the situation when there is a next. So finally the last situation is that if we are not on the first page and we are seeing if the cursor that was provided to us, it is pointing to the previous page. So in this case, one thing that you need to understand is that there will always be previous. In case of the previous, there will always be next, but the previous needs to be calculated. So in this case, the situation was that it will always have previous, and in this scenario it will always have next, but we need to calculate previous in this scenario. So simply let's get the next car. So the code would be basically the same. So basically I will copy this, and then so if there is pagination, in that case it means we can get the previous cursor. So yeah, if there is pagination, we can calculate we can create the cursor for the previous cursor, and then finally at the end of this we can update the pagination variable to once more generate the pager by passing the next cursor and the previous cursor, and at the end what can we do is we can simply return the pagination. So over here simply let's return the pagination. So as you can see, so this method is intended to return only the helpers.pagination info. So we are not throwing any sort of errors from here. So yeah, we are almost done. So now let's go to the controller. So as you can see, page info. So what is this saying is that it is declared but not used. So now we will make the use of this. So for this we need to create some sort of response. So what will we do is we'll create a response struct, and then let's name this as response data transfer object, and then we'll pass things like success is equal to true, and then we pass the data as books. And for the pagination, what can we do is we can pass the page info that we got from this place, and then finally what can we do is return c.status. So over here what I did was I hard coded 500, but with Fiverr we get some constants as well. So what can we do is Fiverr.status okay, and then simply we can return the data as JSON. Yeah, so this almost completes our implementation with the implementation remaining, and then it is showing some sort of errors over here. Okay, we'll look into this in a while. So models.book does not implement database.paginated item. So let's go to our book.go. So it does not seem that we missed anything over here, but let's quickly try to see what the issue is. So basically it should have implemented it. So firstly let's implement this common.response DTO, and then we'll fix that particular issue. So over here we will create a new folder, so that is intended to, okay, I cannot create the folder over here, so I'll do mkdir and then common. So we are keeping the things very simple at the moment, but as soon as the application grows we'll be refactoring the code to make it more cleaner. So for now we do not have a clear idea about what the full application is going to be. In the upcoming videos we'll be fixing the things. So over here within the common, so it means we will be keeping the things that will be used throughout the application, which is a common part will be kept over here. So now let's name this as package common. So now we need to define response DTO, which is the struct, and then we will have something like success, which is the type of bool, and in the JSON representation we'll be making this as success in the lowercase, and then we need to have something like data, so it can be anything, so we do not know the actual type of the data, so let's keep it to be any, and then pagination, so it will be helpers dot pagination info, and in the JSON representation it will be pagination. So let's go to the books controller. So it seems we have not imported this, so command dot response DTO. So to do this I will once again type the code command dot response DTO. So it is not importing it as well, so let's quickly import it and let's fix the issue. So from where we can get it, we can simply copy this, and then over here instead of database it needs to be common, and then let's see, yeah, the issue is fixed. So the only thing that is remaining at the moment is that it says the model book has not implemented the interface, so we'll take a look into it. So there was a very small issue, so it should have been a receiver, instead I had passed book as an argument of the method, so which was the mistake. So yeah, doing this automatically fixed the issue. So now I can simply run main.go, and now it will boot my application on 3001. So let's open the Chrome, and now on this part let's try to reload the page. So it says it is unable to get the data. Yeah, it should not get the data. The reason is that we have not added the router till this point. So you can see this is very similar to how we can work with Express.js. So either we can provide a closure and work over itself, or the next thing that we could do is we could basically import the file and implement it. For example, so app.get, and we are implementing a books route, so let's name this as books, and then so it comes from the bookscontroller dot get paginated books, but I think it will not work because we have not implemented it. So let's quickly implement it. So for doing this let's go to this, and let's quickly import the package called controllers, and then over here what it needs to be is, instead of books controller it needs to be controllers dot get paginated books. So in Go we need to recompile the changes every time we work on, so we are doing the recompilation. So let's go to our Chrome. So there are 20 data. So as you can see, if I do not pass any arguments, so what does this do is it fetches all of the data, and it does not fetch all the data because there is a hard limit of 10 as per page option. So it fetches the 10 data, and the default order is this descending order. And when you look into the response, you can see that there is a cursor which does not seem to have any value. But let's do base64 decoding. So now if I go into this and if I try to decode, so you can see it holds some sort of data, like it is pointing next, and then it is the next ID is this, and created that. So I want to show you how the query looks like at the moment, but for now let's start with sort underscore order is equal to ascending, and for underscore page is equal to 2. So let's start with this so that it is very easier for us to understand. So while running this, what is the query that we queried in the database is that, so the first and foremost query is select everything from books order by created at ascending limit 3. So why are we doing this? Is that we want just to get the 2 items. The per page limit is 2, but to be assured whether or not there is next page, we need to get we need to set the limit to the provided limit plus 1, so that sorry, so that if the value exists, or if the count is greater than the limit, meaning the request query instead of this value, in that case there is definitely a pagination. So by doing this we calculate the data, and so the specific part over here, so if you check this, so this is basically implementing all of the queries. So now we will now pass the query and then see the data. So now you can see we have seed the data in a way that it will be added in ascending order, like book 1, book 2, book 3 up to book 20. So now let's duplicate this, and for this what will we do is we will pass the cursor, and then let's see, it is unable to get the issues. So the first issue was I forgot to add the question mark over here, which should have been on the place. And next thing in the get paginated operator, so this is the place where I made another minor mistake, so it should be greater than. If we are pointing next and if the sort order is descending, it needs to be greater than. So once more, let's compile our code and let's quickly go to the Chrome and let's see. Yeah, we are okay. And then let's once more reload the code. You can see the query that is being queried at the time is very, very simple. And now let's make the use of this cursor. Let's simply duplicate it and then simply pass the cursor. So with this you can see I can get the data, so it's 18 and 17. So now once more, okay, it seems I made the changes. I sent the order to the descending order and the value was set to per page. So now it was 2019 and it's good that we are getting 18 and 17. So now I want to get the previous page. So trying to get the previous page means I should get the first page once more. So for that, if I pass the value, it should be 20 and 19, and there should not be the previous page, but there will always be the previous page. So as you remember the formula that we had applied over here, so what did we say is that in case of if we are checking the previous cursor, there will always be the next, but there might not be the previous. So as you can see, the basic cursor pagination implementation has been done. We verified with the descending order. So finally, let's close this, and finally let's check the changes in the ascending order. So you can see in the ascending order, so the data is 1 and 2. So let's quickly get the data. Let's simply duplicate it and then let's pass the cursor as this. So now 1 2, the next page should be 3 and 4. So now from the page 3 and 4, if I go back to the next page, means using the previous cursor, in that case if I pass the full data, it should be 1 and 2. So as you can see, so Go Fiber has and the Go ORM provide a good logger as well. We can see the full logs on our console. So the queries that are being carried on the different cases can be seen here. So in conclusion, we can see that we basically implemented a very good and the reusable pagination component. So let's assume this as a component. So we implemented a basic reusable pagination implementation with Go ORM. So on the upcoming videos, we'll be continuing this book key application in Go. So I'm currently working on creating different series using the different languages like the Node.js and TypeScript, Go and Go ORM. So we'll be using the we'll be creating the same app, same REST API using the different technologies. So thank you so much for your time. See you on the next video.